What is your takeaway from this kind of event and the immediate reaction? Is it fairly typical for this type of event?
Yes, this was worse than many of the other events in the sense that there's a lot of people injured as well as, of course, as people killed. And the emotions are certainly not surprising and perfectly understandable overall.
But in terms of how do we deal with this kind of problem going forward, how typical is that?
Well, my fear is that it's going to be typical, namely there'll be an overreaction and an over-extrapolation. You got some bombs going off at an athletic event, and clearly any effort to try to catch the perpetrators is, to say the least, well worth the tax money. But then the idea that therefore all sporting events are at stake, and that therefore the thousands and thousands of sporting events have to have extra security, that kind of thing, is unfortunately typical as well. A case in point might be after the underwear bomber took place. Something had to be done, so two things happened. One was that the president insisted that there be more air marshals on airplanes, who couldn't have done anything about the underwear bomber anyway, because he was where the air marshals aren't, and they don't fly in that many airplanes. The other thing was the body scanner to try to detect that, and so now hundreds of millions of dollars have spent so far, and it'll be easily into the billions fairly soon, if they continue with these new body scanner technology to deal with that kind of problem. One problem with that solution is that the scanners do not seem to be capable of detecting the kind of explosive the underwear bomber actually had. And the other is the expenses. It has to be extremely high because it doesn't make any sense to protect only a few airports or only some airports, but rather protect them all, because obviously a terrorist who wants to get on a plane can simply find, by either process of elimination or by looking on the web, actually, that there are some airports that don't have these scanners and then just simply go in there. So therefore they really have to spend a terrific amount of money to deal with this problem. And our analysis, the one that Mark Stewart and I have done, indicates that even if the body scanners do work, they don't reduce the risk enough to be worth their cost. In other words, they're not cost effective. And there's a big rush to spend this huge amount of money on this technology before doing that kind of analysis. And I'm afraid something like that will happen after the Boston case as well.
The emotional impact, the emotional toll on these things is fairly high, and that drives, I suspect, a lot of the sort of do something response by politicians. But trying to separate that out, what would you tell people are the real risks and the real costs associated with additional security for these types of events?
Yeah, you'd really want to. I've dreamed for the day in which the politicians and the people in charge will sort of do a sensible assessment. Your chance of being killed by a terrorist is about 1 in 3.5 million per year, and people should know that. They may say, "Well, that's not safe enough. I want to be even safer," but they should start from that area. And since 9/11, there's only been one case of a politician actually saying in public, essentially, get a life, your chance of being killed by a terrorist is about the same as being killed by lightning. And that was Mayor Bloomberg in 2007, who took a certain amount of flack over that, but was then reelected 2 years later. So it may not be completely hopeless. But the fact that no one knows that and says that is absurd. Essentially, the issue is not, are we safer? You don't start from that. You start from, how safe are we? Clearly, adding one bomb-detecting dog in one airport in some sense makes us safer. That doesn't mean it's a good idea. And so where you start with is this, some sense of how safe we are and the safety, the terrorist threat, such as it is, that suggests that 1 out of every 3.5 million people are going to die each year from a terrorist attack, which is obviously an extremely low number.
The FBI has, I guess, aided a lot of these sort of would-be terrorists in terms of providing them with not just encouragement, but also means that the would-be terrorist believes are going to help them carry these things off. But what's the record of these kinds of attacks?
Yeah, overall, of course, we've lived now for well over a decade with an extremely low number of people being killed by terrorists. 16, and if the Boston case is also terrorism from the Muslims, that'll be up to 19. That's a very small number. When I've looked at all the cases of people who have been arrested on terrorism charges since 9/11 with a plot to do something within the United States, it's not a very impressive bunch. Quite a few of them, in fact, over half of the cases involve FBI informants who have now put together who have basically helped the plot develop, including giving the would-be terrorists supposed explosives, which they then tried to detonate. But as you look in these cases, it's pretty clear these guys never would have been able to do it on their own. Now, one thing it has been that the Boston cases is notable for is that this is the first time anybody since 9/11, a terrorist, has been able to detonate even a simple bomb. So that's unique. Also in the case of Britain, except for the 4 bombs that were ignited in the attack on the transit system in London in 2005, no terrorist in Britain has been able to detonate even a simple bomb. What's impressive about this is that in the 1970s, there were dozens and dozens of bombings in the United States, resulting in the death of some 70 people over the course of that whole decade. That's still not a huge number, but it's certainly a large number, much larger than has happened since 9/11. So it's not the case that terrorists in the past have been unable to set off bombs, but it's really impressive how little bombing has taken place.
The response to this kind of event, that these things are rare and we probably can't prevent all of them, just simply isn't very satisfying. And for most people, for a lot of people, I should say, it's a non-starter.
Yeah, I'm not sure I agree with that. I've been saying this for a long time to all kinds of audience, student audiences, faculty audience, senior citizen audiences, community groups and stuff. And I certainly do get some disagreement. But everybody knows that life is not risk-free. And that getting the risks more or less right isn't sensible. And worrying about things that are not great dangers is foolish when you have to worry about things that are great dangers. And people don't necessarily do that all that well, but they certainly understand the basic logic of that. When Mayor Bloomberg says your chance of being killed is about the same as being struck by lightning, he does get a bit of flack, but that's all, and he continues on being mayor. And I think many politicians and other people could emulate that. The big problem, if you're running a bureaucracy that depends on this, is if you say your chance of being killed actually is only about 1 in 3.5 million per year, you're afraid that someone is then going to say, then how come we're giving you so much money? And it's an understandable situation that you wouldn't want to hear that response. That is not, however, a very noble reaction. And so it seems to me a responsible policymaker should say exactly that.